Good evening. Okay, we're just gonna thank you for joining us. Our live audience is just filtering in now. It came to my attention last week that some people online were actually trying to ask questions, but I couldn't hear them because the sound was off on my computer. So even if they had unmuted themselves, I still wouldn't have heard them. So there you go. How's everybody doing this week? Yeah. Okay, so reminder. I happen to be going to the Beit HaMikdash on Monday morning. You've probably been there a few times. Yeah. So we're going, and everybody's welcome to go, but you don't have to necessarily go with me. You know, if it's easier to go later in the morning, that's your prerogative. You know, the yeshivat Beit people, they go significantly later. The Rosh Yeshiva is his minyan at 7. That's Rabbi Weber. But then they have, their usual activities and things like that, and more minyanim later in the day. For example, it was unfortunate that I only got to meet Yehuda Levi in person much later because I happened to go later than I usually go because I was bringing my family. But for quite a while, whenever I would go, I'd go first thing in the morning, and I was also keeping it a secret. So no one. It wasn't. Well, I didn't. It was usually before I had to go somewhere else. I don't want to tell anybody, like tell the Rosh Kol here I was going. Now I'm more open about it. So yeah. Yeah, so there was a reason for it. So now now there's more of a reason to actually tell people so that we can get people to show up. And yeah, that's it. Yeah, any questions from about what we did last week? Yeah. Please.
Must one put on tefillin and say Kriyat Shema before they do a minyan and Beit?
No.
Well, pray and then go join a minyan after.
No. It's just better to. It's reason makdim l'mitzvahs. You have a whole 2 hours or so before they actually let you onto Harbais before you could, daven and all that. So you might as well get the mitzvah done. You want to do it as soon as possible. So Kriyat Shema definitely. I actually don't. As you saw at Lechatchila, I try to finish my prayers before going up with the first group for prayers on Harbais. You saw that. Yeah, I'd rather daven, Talis and Phil. There is no commandment specifically to attend a minyan on Harbais. The whole davening with the minyan thing and talis and tefillin, that's everywhere. There's nothing specific about a minyan on Harbais. Although it's a great thing, there's no mila to it necessarily.
So why do briskers say you don't have to daven with a minyan? Like, where do they get?
I don't know. They say that?
Yeah. They said that at Migdal, and I was like, wait, how do you explain the Rambam which said that
you're supposed to daven with a minyan?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you explain the Chazal that say that you're supposed to daven with a minyan? I don't know. Until I hear a serious scholar say a thing like that, just hearing like briskers, that doesn't mean nothing. If you say Rav Chaim, if you say the brisker Rav had such a thing, then you could start investigating. But if you say Stam briskers, what does that mean?
What is a brisker?
What is a brisker even? Are we not briskers? I don't know. And all that exposition about what is the brisker method, I can't tell you what the brisker method is. I just try to study the Talmud and try to understand what it says. No, it's nothing to do with Chassidut. It's like apparently Rav Chaim's way of studying the Talmud and conceptualization and things like that. I really enjoy reading, let's say, Chidushei Grach. And those books that Rav Shechter put out with Rav Soloveitchik's teachings and his illustrious ancestors' teachings, but I have not yet comprehended what it even means. What does it mean to have a brisker teaching? I know some classic brisker Torahs, but hey Leon. So yeah, I have not figured that out yet, and I hope that God willing, I'll be able to one day understand what it even means. There's some fine yeshivas, by the way, that apparently continue that tradition. Because Rav Lichtenstein was Rosh Yeshiva in the Gush, so they claim to be briskers there. They learn things brisker style.
We're the real ones.
Okay, I don't know.
I don't
know. Look, Rabbi Ginsburg and Rabbi Chait are great, but I haven't figured out what brisker means. Okay. Yeah, and I don't know if Rabbi Bar-Hayim has spoken about this at all. There you go. Oh, mean. Okay, so who waiting for? Well, there was another guy here before. What?
What's his name? You're thinking Robert, but that's a different person.
No, Robert's coming tomorrow. Okay, whatever. So we'll make a little note. Let's get off the triennial cycle for a minute. The annual cycle of Torah studying the Kriyas Torah is actually good because it unites Klal Yisrael. Even in those weeks where there's a little bit of a discrepancy between what the people in Eretz Yisrael are studying and reading and what the people in Chutz La'aretz are doing, there is there at least they're only a week off, and it doesn't last that long. So we could we'll finish at the same time. There is a unifying aspect. By the way, in the times of Chazal, even when they had this 1 year cycle, it doesn't mean that there was 1 year cycle throughout the world. It was a bubble type of thing. And even Bavel, it seems to have been a local city thing. There was no exact description that everybody has to finish on a particular date. It seems to have been connected almost to the year in Rosh Hashanah, and as things changed, Rishonim, Geonim basically made it that the cycle finishes right after Rosh Hashanah, and then they even moved it farther into the year to Simchas Torah, because the reading for Simchas Torah happens to be the first half is Osa Brachos, so might as well make it the whole thing. Okay, we discussed that during the Shabbaton. But I like it because it allows us to have unifying lesson. And I like the idea that the whole Cheder Meraglim thing, the sin of the spies, takes center stage right at the beginning of Tammuz and around Tisha B'Av, because that's the Ikar. So you look at this week's Parsha, the one that most people are reading in Ekev, and you find something very interesting. Interesting statement. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, Al tomar b'levavecha, b'tzidkati heviani Hashem. Don't start to say in your heart, don't think that you are getting this godly privilege to inherit the Holy Land because you're any better than anybody else, because you're righteous. Moshe Rabbeinu says, in the name of God, that the only reason why we get this privilege is because of our ancestors, and because the people whom we are to replace are thoroughly wicked. The Canaanim are bad. Avram Avinu showed up, and he earned it all for himself, and that's why we're doing it. And then Moshe Rabbeinu even says, not only that, you should just know, just because even if you have this sense of Jewish superiority, just to know you've also done some pretty bad things. And then what does he say? He says Cheder Egel, and that is the centerpiece of this week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu's take on Cheder Egel and its aftermath. And that takes up quite a few aliyahs. That's like the bulk of the parsha, right? So that's kind of interesting. Now, what?
Just like generally them just causing trouble the whole time in the Midbar.
He says that, but then he says, first he says, generally, you've been up to no good for a long time. I've known you to be causing trouble since the day I met you. You've been causing trouble. So that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu is unnecessarily harsh in our terms. He's being chuta sara. He's being very exacting with Am Yisrael. He's being very critical of them in order to give them mussar. So I wouldn't say anything like that about my ancestors, but Moshe Rabbeinu said it, and we read in this week's parsha. The interesting thing to note is Moshe Rabbeinu reminds Am Yisrael, don't think you're so high and mighty, you're so holy. What did you do? You did Cheder Egel once. Kind of interesting. Why? I think that Moshe Rabbeinu had a much better example. The whole book started with what? Parashat Devarim. 2 weeks ago. What was the main story in that week's parasha? Moshe Rabbeinu's take on Cheder Meraglim. Moshe Rabbeinu basically gives a whole story. Remember back in Ambalos when we finally left Har Sinai and had to appoint a whole system of leadership because all your 70 elders and 12 Nesiim and a lot of other big shots died in the plague that you brought about upon yourselves. And then we finally got to the edge of the land of Israel and hold it with the spies, and you refused, and the whole generation had to die out. And you guys, just a few months ago, got to see what it's like if you actually have faith in God and you get to beat your enemies, conquer mighty kings, take over the land. You've begun to see that. That's the juxtaposition that Moshe Rabbeinu constructed between the first generation and the second generation. Correct? The first generation were the ones who did the Cheder Egel. So I find it interesting that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's looking for an example, by the way, don't think you're so high and mighty, you've also committed a sin or two, brings up Cheder Egel. When he could have said, you remember the whole Meraglim thing I just mentioned? The one that actually brought about the demise of your fathers. What's going on? So there's an important point that we have to bring out here, that you look between the lines of Moshe Rabbeinu saying, Cheder Egel is a mistake. It is terrible. It approaches idolatry. It is a sin of commission, ideological sin. It's a sin of miscomprehension of how to act religiously. Correct? That's what Cheder Egel basically is. Correct? It's an ideology, but we could also overcome it. Moshe Rabbeinu focuses on his prayers, his 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain. Again, twice he says he went up on the mountain to pray. It's implied that he did 2 such prayer sessions, 2 40-day prayer sessions in the aftermath of Chet Egel. There's enough room in the summer to do that. The summer, basically, the way we have in our Jewish calendar is that you have 40 days from the beginning of basically Sivan until Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is how long? 40 days. And from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av is 3 weeks. And from Tisha B'Av until Rosh Chodesh Elul is 3 weeks. And from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur is 40 days. Giving you a nice symmetry of the summer, 40 days, 3 weeks, 40 days. Wait a minute, 3 weeks, I did the math, it comes out to how many days? 42 days. So 6 weeks is 42 days, which means the summer can be broken down to 40 days, 42 days, 40 days. Or 40 days, 1 day in between, 40 days, one day in between, and 40 days. And that's how some understand what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. He spent 40 days on the mountain, came back down, and right away had to go back up and pray on behalf of Am Yisrael so they won't get destroyed. And then another 40 days to achieve complete atonement for them.
The thing Rashi says is that the first 40 and the last 40 are like the good one, and the middle 40 is the bad one.
Yeah. So then you don't have time. The problem is you don't allow, if you say this, then you do not allow for that whole story described in Ki Tisa about Moshe Rabbeinu moving his tent out of the camp and calling that his Ohel Moed. And that's where he would teach the people, and they would stand up and wait until he gets to the Ohel Moed. You're familiar with this one. When was that, apparently? So they have to say that was in the time before they constructed the Mishkan. That was once Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain, but it doesn't fit contextually. It seems, always liked the shot that Moshe Rabbeinu was always on the mountain just for 80 days. The first 40 days and the last 40 days. And in the meantime, he was back chastising the people. And those 42 days in the middle is when he had his tent, so to speak, outside the camp to represent that God had distanced himself. And that was called the Ohel Moed. Okay, fine. Whatever it may be, I wasn't there, so it's a question of history. The point is, Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching them that the Chet Egel, despite its gravity, is something we can overcome. Moshe Rabbeinu overcame it with prayer, and something for which you can repent. It is a mistake. It is a mistake that many people make. Why? Because when we worship God, we have this Yetzer Hara to want to create an intermediary. That's basically what happened. They were worried, Moshe Rabbeinu was gone. It's not like they denied God. They wanted to get closer to God. And you could say all these other, we could discuss what is behind idolatry and how certain ideas, even among Judaism today, unfortunately approach an idolatrous, black hole. There's a slippery slope of idolatrous thinking or superstitious thinking. Yet, Chet Meraglim was much worse. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu started the book with that incident. What did Chet Meraglim represent? Complete lack of faith. Chet Meraglim represented, an orthopraxy. That is, you have these people who are completely religious, and they espouse religiosity and loyalty to keeping the Torah. But when it comes to, actually putting their chips on the table, putting more money where their mouth is, they're like, oh, look, we can't win this war. We're not even going for this. And God's answer to them was not even a punishment. It was, you want to stay in the Galut, so guess what? You will stay in the Galut. It is a much deeper ideological problem. It shows a lack of connection between the theory and the practice. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu has to start the book with saying, your fathers were undone, not by the Chet Egel. Yeah, that's why you should just know you could commit a sin. He's saving this for the middle of the book. The sin that brought everybody down was Chet Meraglim and everything it entailed, and also the Lashon Hara involved about speaking bad about the land and God's promises. The idea that they had that there must be a catch. God is just doing all these miracles for them, feeding them miraculous bread, and housing them, etc. Everything, all the miracles in the desert, and all the promised miracles that would happen when they get into the promised land. What was it for? They thought God was basically doing a Hansel and Gretel thing to them, right? Fattening them for the slaughter. That's what they really believed. At least, maybe if they didn't believe it, they didn't know about it. They said it. They said it out loud. And that was a problem. Okay, so we should hope to overcome these things. How do we overcome it today? We could actually see this today, right now. Those in Chutz La'aretz, unfortunately, have not broken out of the Meraglim mold, which is, we can't really do this. Come on. People are telling me, don't make Aliyah. you're going to be poor. Okay, fine. So it took longer to buy an automobile and a car, automobile and a house. Okay, fine. It was worth it. It was worth instead of taking a job offer into California, but to just make aliyah to a much lesser thing. And it's hard to find a job in these types of professions here in Eretz Yisrael than it is in America. Shkoyach. But we do it anyways, right? It's harder. Yeah, a lot of people say, "Oh, you make aliyah." What's the joke is? What's the best way to make a small fortune in Israel?
Come with a large fortune.
Come with a large fortune, exactly. We know this was part of this was baked into the whole cake thing. We knew that, but we're going to do it anyways. The problem is too many people are stuck, and we have to help them. We're not going to criticize them. We have to show them the light here. This is something that God wants. Whereas in Eretz Yisrael, the people have already taken that step. They're beyond that. The problem is Cheda Egel type of problems. The replacement theology. I don't mean the Chas v'Shalom, the Christian idea of replacement theology. I mean substitution. God wants something, and we substitute something else for that because we don't feel reserving. We don't see Moshe Rabbeinu in front of us. What do we substitute nowadays? Well, no, we're in Eretz Yisrael. Thank God, the Jews in Eretz Yisrael.
And there are a lot of people who take Eretz
Yisrael and
they replace God with the land.
Oh yeah, okay, or the state Chas v'Shalom also, the government. That can't do any wrong. That's one thing. I'm thinking also about places of pilgrimage. We're supposed to go visit the temple, and we've created other places of pilgrimage, Yad Vashem and Meron and Uman. By the way, there's nothing wrong with going to Yad Vashem. You should take your children there when they get bigger. Don't take a 6-year-old; they'll traumatize them. You can tell your 6-year-old about the Holocaust, explain it, but there's some things that are too traumatizing for kids. Thank God, my wife's grandmother is a Holocaust survivor, so we still have people with whom to speak about these things, first person. But you should teach your kids about that. But the problem is, for many people, especially politicians, as you know, Yad Vashem has basically replaced Jewish places, or even worse, the Kotel itself. People think the Kotel, that's it, that's the line, and that's been a replacement for the temple. Certain mitzvahs, we took off our tefillin because we're supposed to wear tefillin all the time as a sign of the covenant. That's the mark of a Jewish person. And what do we replace it with? A yarmulke. The yarmulke is a replacement for tefillin. Chazal don't talk about yarmulkes. Show me the Rambam when he talks about the importance of wearing a yarmulke. The Rambam talks about wearing covering one's head in atifah during prayer, right? But does Rambam talk about yarmulke, the importance of yarmulke anywhere? Does it only go? No, he actually knocks it down, yarmulke, right? So that's the big replacement. And tzitzis, tefillin and tzitzis go into this thing. It's been replaced by yarmulke and Jewish garb. What are you going to do? We replace things. We have to learn not to replace these things.
We should all look like Eastern European businessmen from the 19th century.
No, well,
that's a very Jewish way of clothing.
Okay, that might be good for you. And another thing, this is the last one. Someone asked about this. I admire Haredi society. I remember saying that Rabbi Parnas said back in yeshiva. This is like 20 years ago. He said he liked living in what is a yeshivish environment. He didn't use the word Haredi. That didn't become a word until a little bit later. That's more of an Israeli word, but eventually became a word. He likes it because it's a completely Jewish culture. You want to live in a Jewish culture. That's good. You want to live a culture that's kula Torah. It is entirely Torah. And I think that, for better or for worse, if you were to go to, let's say, Lakewood or Beitar Elite, etc., you'll find a culture that is entirely Torah-based and has very little outside influence. Even if you can say, yes, well, the garb is taken from 19th century Europe. Shkoyach. It's not, it doesn't influence them like they're thinking about European, 19th century European culture and their values, thank God. That's a good thing. It's entirely Torah. But here's the problem. It might be Kula Torah, but it's not Kola Torah Kula. It's not the entire Torah. You might end up in such a place. And Kal v'chomer, if you go to a place that has, unfortunately, foreign influences, you go to some modernish place, you're wading in foreign influence that people don't even realize is nonsense. Rabbi Victor Miller pointed this out. You go live in, I don't know, they call them Tinek Shenishba. There's nothing wrong with Tinek, by the way. That was just joking.
Yeah,
Okay, you know that. So everybody has it. Well, not everybody. A lot of people think watching TV is a normal thing. Living a life of television or whatever is normal. That's not normal. You have to take that out. So whereas you have to find that nice medium. This is for Nehemiah out there. He's not with us, but he'll be listening to this. You want a culture that's entirely Jewish. That's Haredi one, but we have to improve on it because it doesn't incorporate the entire Torah. There are certain things that, like we are going to be learning now, which in some places they have hostility. Yes, you could live with Rabbi Brandt where he lives because he does study Kola Torah, Kula, And the problem is, then you might get ostracized saying, oh, but this whole thing that which we are going to study forthwith, those are things you shouldn't study. Why? Because it might make you non-conform, right? You learn how to pronounce Hebrew properly. Someone asked, oh, when are you pronouncing Hebrew properly? The guy in the video said, well, yeah, I said, yeah, I speak colloquially English sometimes. Pronouncing Hebrew properly is something that we say for prayer and reading the Torah. It's very hard to try to speak Hebrew that way. We're not used to it. And your kids won't understand you if you talk that way. So, we want to incorporate these things. But the problem is, I know people around here, alleged rabbis, who were very uncomfortable. Baruch Hashem, most are comfortable with hearing that, Vav is pronounced like a W. Another one is just like, you can't do that. I don't want you telling that. If I could, I would make sure you would not tell people this. Like, let them know about this fact, because it could chas v'shalom make it that they'll pronounce a vav like a W, and that will lead to mixed dancing, I guess. So it's pretty bad. Yeah, but seriously, it's kind of funny, by the way. And we're going to close with this. Even if you don't think that a vav should be pronounced as a W, if you're pronouncing Hebrew in the wrongest way, let's say you have a Galicianer accent, so the O is an I and the U is an E, yeah, then you never pronounce a vav like a W. But if you pronounce at least a shuruk like a U, then you're pronouncing a vav like a W, correct? Every time there's a shuruk malay, the vav is there because the vowel sound is U, and you cannot pronounce an U without a W sound. If you don't do that thing with your lips, it'll just be Okay, plus W is U. So too, you cannot pronounce a chirik without a yud. Everybody knows a chirik carries a yud with it. There's no such thing as a human mouth being able to produce the sound of a long E without him putting his palate in the position of pronouncing a Y, a yud. It's a physical impossibility if you're a human. So we all know that yud is a natural part of it. So everybody pronounces a yud, even a person would deny. I don't say a person comes into here and says a yud should be pronounced like an American J. So he opens up the Torah. He says, Bereshith bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz ha'jatha. Okay, he would say that ha'jatha. Okay, he pronounces a yud like a J. Even if he were to do a silly thing like that, when he says Bereshith, when he says that sheath, so he's pronouncing the yud like a Y. Okay, there's no way around it. So too, anytime a person pronounces a shuruk properly, he's acknowledging that a vav is pronounced like a W. So too, anytime he pronounces cholam correctly, kal v'chomer, anytime both vowels are followed by a patach genuva, as we mentioned last week, no wah, lanu wah, he's pronouncing a W, whether he likes it or not. So just to know, people do it. Guys, let's open up the Sefer Avodah. Let's finish Hilchot Beit HaBechira. Okay. Pizza is okay. Okay, is there some left for me? Maybe there's some other people who are supposed to join us. Oh, good. Okay, so keep it warm. You could thank God. If you need a drink, by the way, there's drinks. You guys know where the drinks are at, right? Well, here's a bottle. The cups are in the closet over there, and also there's more in the kitchen. Where were we? We mentioned about fearing the Mikdash in the 7th parak. You know what? I should put this up on the screen for the benefit of those viewing at home, and I'm sorry I didn't do it last week, so kindly bear with me. I'm going to use Machon Mamre, of course, which is the best way to do this. Mishneh Torah. I think it's great that we could sit here in Eretz Yisrael and learn this. We have to appreciate how much fortunate we are than, let's say, our ancestors. As my grandfather passed away in New York, and that was more than 40 years ago. And I don't think he ever came to Eretz Yisrael. I know he was a potential victim of the pogroms, and if he had stuck around in Europe into World War II, he might have been a victim of the Holocaust. But he got out, and he had a family, and life wasn't easy for him, even in New York. I don't think he died a rich man, but he died fortunate that he had many grandchildren. He got to see his last children married off. That was okay. And my other grandfather passed away 16 years ago almost. Had a lot more fortune also, but he also didn't live in Eretz Yisrael. He had family in Eretz Yisrael, but he didn't live to see me make Aliyah. Got to be a great grandfather, but he didn't have the fortune we have. And my children have been to the Beis HaMikdash a few times already, and they lack nothing, thank God. So their situation is a lot more fortunate than those of my grandparents. Immeasurably more fortunate. And you're fortunate also. When I was your age, there was no such thing as visiting the Beis HaMikdash. Yet, how many times have you been there already? Oh, good. 3 times is great. That's a lot more than the Rambam did. That's a lot more than anybody who's lived after the Churban has, right? Yeah.
Well,
So,
probably not more than
You should, okay, but you'll, God willing, and you'll be there many more times. So we're doing a lot better than those who came before us. Let me try. Sorry, guys, I haven't put this on the screen yet. I just want to take this opportunity to be so thankful.
So it's the opposite of Yamida Sedoros.
It's no, Rambam doesn't believe in that, by the way.
Right? No, that's what I'm saying.
What halach we got up to? I think we got halacha chet, the 7th parak halacha chet, because we always mention halacha zayin. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's look at halacha chet. I'm going to put it on the screen one more time. The 7th parak, the 8th halacha. Hold on, guys. For those of you joining us at home, we'll have some pizza in your honor. Okay, here it's this halacha. I'll place it on the screen now. Share screen. Okay, so we're over here. I'm going to collapse the viewers. Okay, there we go. It says here, Bizman she'yichya mikdash banui. So this is already you found one textual difference. The Machon Mamre has it, and I think the Makbili has it shehaya, when it was. And in the Koran, which is not, I don't think it's exact as the Makbili or the Machon Mamre, says yichya, but he has the das at least. The point is when the mikdash is standing. Okay, in Hebrew it doesn't mean just. You could have said if it was past tense, this halacha that might not come back. Right? Whereas here they're looking into the future. Fine. The point is mikdash when it's banui asur lo la'adam lakelt rosho min atzofim shehu chutz li'Yerushalayim v'lifnim. That doesn't apply today. The Rambam is making a distinction. This is when the mikdash is actually standing. You can't make a joke from within that perimeter. Where is the tzofim? That's Har Tzofim. Yeah. So nowadays the whole area, by the way, is settled. There's very little like open space between Jerusalem and Mount Scopus, by the way. Right? There's like whole Arab neighborhoods and streets and everything. It's you can drive there, but that's what it was. You can't lakel rosh. What does lakel rosh means? Joking around and things like that. Nowadays, God willing, even if they build a mikdash, there's a lot of built-up area. If you're standing behind a building or something like that, he says a gader. That's just a fence. Kavah chomer indoors. You can make a joke. You guys should get married. Basically, anything you talk about with your wife might actually be kalut rosh, correct? So you wouldn't be allowed to do that if you were just whatever. So, but now you can because you're indoors. You don't have to worry about that. Things change indoors, and that's going to be the next halacha, where you can see in the notes they actually give exceptions to this. You're going to say that, wow, I remember the dormitory that they built at Lander College for Men basically violates this halacha. And the next one. So let's read it inside. It says, Asur la'adam olam she'yipaneh o she'yishan bein mizrach la'ma'arav. Yipaneh means answer the call of nature. Well, it's not necessarily in a bathroom, but it's like even if he's outdoors. So he cannot be facing east-west or back to the east, front to the west, or vice versa, or to sleep. That is, the bed is oriented this way. And they pointed out when the first year at Lander College, they basically made it that the dormitory was oriented. It was a number of apartments. It was attached houses there in Kew Gardens Hills. And it so happened that every single bed in the dormitory was east-west, oriented east-west. Kind of weird, right? So how do we get around this halacha? Yeah, this is brought in Shulchan Aruch, by the way. You can't make a beit hakisei. That means a lavatory, where a person would be sitting there and facing east or facing west. And needless to say, most people, when they build their bathrooms, you don't actually look which way is a person who's sitting there. Which way is he facing when he's on the toilet? Is that something to care about? You could look at a floor plan of many apartments built here and now throughout Eretz Israel. You could have one apartment, one house that has a person sitting north-south in this toilet, and the other one's east-west. The other one's, I didn't take out a compass and exactly check, but it's give or take, it's about east-west. So how do we get around this? Good question, right? The answer is indoors doesn't count. It means when the person's outdoors. Once he's indoors, just like the previous halacha, so all bets are off. The Echal is in the west. What does that mean? The main way to enter the temple is by coming in from the eastern gate, from which we pray. So a person entering the temple enters from the east straight and goes west. Technically speaking, a person could enter the temple complex from the west, behind the temple. That's just improper. That's not a proper entrance, so to speak.
So, come in from the south and the gate?
So people used to come from the south, but then they would go, turn right, and then they'd come back through the
Oh,
eastern
so
gate.
to enter the
Yeah, it's good to enter through the eastern gate. Go straight. Technically speaking, you could skip over the Ezrat Nashim even. You could just enter the Azara from the west or the north without having to go through the women's courtyard, right? Yeah, the proper way is to come in through the east, though. That's the way to do it. So
why do they have other
what?
gates?
What?
So why are there other gates?
Because sometimes people need to leave other ways. We're going to see there's halachot to leave. The way it was done in the desert was, you could see the models of the Mishkan, is that there was only one gate, and it was on the east, because it was only the inner Azara. There was only one Azara. But technically speaking, anybody could enter, let's say, Machalin Livia from any direction. And in Shilo, remember, there wasn't really an Azara, so to speak. There was an area that was designated as an Azara, but there was no real entrance. It was just like wide open. So this is something they did in Yerushalayim. They made different gates. There's an idea that prayers come in through gates, different tribes come in through gates, to show that everybody can come from all directions toward God. It's representative of something. And we're going to see also a technical halacha: a person becomes contaminated for whatever reason. The Kohen, who's contaminated suddenly in the service, should leave as soon as possible and as quickly as possible. So you need multiple gates for that. Also, there's the idea of honor. It looks more elaborate to have other gates around the place. Just like we see, what's the point of having the Levitic guards at different stations around the Temple Mount? They're not really there at night. It's just an honor guard. That's the answer. It looks more honorific to have these things. So there's a number of reasons why the temple has multiple gates. Let's see the next thing. You see this? They put, I think they had in the Korean notes, they give you the exceptions to these halachot. They tell you how you can sleep and how you can take care of your business, even with this whole east-west problem. Next. This person should not do his business facing east or facing west. Person should orient himself north-south in order to sleep and to do this. Person has to urinate somewhere in that area, basically between the temple and Mount Scopus. He should do it in this way. He should be sitting. Okay. Fanav klape hakodesh. You should sit. That way, it's basically not upwards. Or he should somehow put it to his side. He should turn east, west. He should turn north, south. Something. Just make sure to do it right. Thank God nowadays most people aren't forced to have to urinate out in the open like they used to. A person was on the road. It's not like they had rest stops along the way. And the idea of indoor plumbing, which has by the way been a real boon for humanity, is something that most people never had. It's a new invention. Or even having access to your own personal toilets, that was something that only the richest people in history had. So things have changed, thank God, for the better. And a lot of these halachot, we don't really pay attention. People don't have to sleep out in the open also. How do pilgrims sleep? Let's say you're in a caravan. 20 Jews are coming from, Asia Minor for the temple for the Shavuot, and you're with them. So how do you travel? So you have a few horses, maybe if you're well-to-do. Maybe you have even a camel or two and a wagon, right? Where do you sleep? Because it's a few weeks' journey. It's 2 weeks' journey to get there.
Most likely either
Well,
in a tent or in a hooded
So
wagon.
you get some people just bring tents, and some people do like the soldiers do. And some people, you have a sleeping bag. You sleep out in the, you make a circle the wagon, so to speak, put a fire in the middle, and all the men are sleeping out in the field, as described in, let's say, Sefer Ezra and Nehemiah. So where do you go to the bathroom there? You have to dig a hole somewhere. So this used to be an issue when you were on the road and you had to go. You didn't have an indoor place in which to do it. Shalom Aleichem. Okay, let's see the next halacha. A person should not build himself a house similar to the way we describe building the temple. So the question is, now you have, according to the Rambam, now it's a suffix. This is a halacha d'oraisa then. So remember we saw there was a suffix, how to actually build heichal. Is it cubic shape or is it that T shape? So according to the Rambam, you can't make your house cubic like the temple. And also he described how it has these protrusions in the wall. The actual walls itself had, this lattice work, etc. There is in the roveds, right? Or you shouldn't build the inside of your house like they did the temple. You could build some other way, but don't do it like the temple. But according to the Rambam, if I built like my house, similar to the models that you see in Jerusalem, the non-Rambam side of the temple, that would be mutter, and vice versa. If you built your house nice and square like the Rambam says, square all around like a cube, So maybe that would be the Isser according to Rambam, but mutter to everybody else. Okay, so don't do either.
But if
Well,
it's just a cube and stuff be covered, it looks like a Heichal.
well, so we saw that a picture of a cube with the certain protrusions in the wall, like
So you'd have to make it like very specific.
you have to do it like this, like the protrusions and the roved and everything. That's the way the Rambam. Apparently, that's the way the Rambam built his. Would say you can't build your temple, well, you can't build your house, or achsadra tavnit ulam, an open room. Remember, the ulam was the first room of the temple, which is actually open air. Why? It had a gateway, but it had no door, so it was always open to the elements. That's the ulam. So if you have an open room like that, you cannot build it the way this temple room was built. Chatzer keneged azara. You shouldn't build yourself a yard like that of the temple courtyard with steps in the right locations. That we saw that there's ways to go up and down where the Levium stand. There's a duchan, etc. You cannot do that. Shulchan kitzurata shulchan. You want to build yourself a table. Does anybody build a table? How did the table look in the temple? And then one surface and then racks, 5 layers of double racks. So would you ever build a thing like that? Well, bakers build a thing like that. That's how they put. So you shouldn't build something like that. Well,
Always still wouldn't look like that because it has like the weird.
Yeah, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't say like. The problem is a lot of people like building menorahs. The most common thing you find is menorahs. Shulchan ketzurah shulchan u'menorah ketzurah menorah. When do Jews have menorahs? On Hanukkah. That's the thing. The Rambam didn't talk about menorahs. The Rambam would say you don't build a menorah. The Rambam's way of lighting Hanukkah candles is different than what most people do. The Rambam says you light for the number of people in the house. So if you had 5 people in the house, the first night you light a 5-branch candelabrum. The second night you light 2 5-branch candelabrums. The third night you light 3 5-branch candelabrums. Right? Candelabra. Sorry, candelabrum is singular. Candelabra is the plural. Right? By the way, the Rambam would say you can't make your menorah. You have 7 people in your house. How are you going to do it? So you have to make sure to make the menorah not like they did in the temple. But then again, most people use rounded branches menorahs on Hanukkah. And the Rambam says that the menorah had what? Straight branch. Does he say dafka has to be straight and not rounded? We never found the Rambam. Maybe it was just his schematic happened to the simplicity. He did it straight branch. Where the Rambam would say, we saw that also earlier. The point, what? What? Well, yeah, because every primary source we have, especially from Jews and non-Jews alike, who saw the menorah and made shapes of the menorah, put it on their coins, put it on their frescoes, put it in their whatever. Even the Roman despoilers of the temple depicted the menorah of the temple having rounded branches. And the Rishonim would say it was like that. So it seems the Rambam has a lot against him in this regard. The first time in history, we have it like basically that, the menorah is supposed to be straight branched is based on the Rambam schematic, which is from the 1100s. So it's a little bit late.
Does he specifically write that it's supposed to be?
So yeah, he also doesn't write that specifically. That's another way. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe felt that it has to be dafka straight branched, and others say maybe there is no halacha on this. It's just an aesthetic. There's a lot that's left to the artisans to do. I would think that that the temple ones were actually rounded, but who knows? There were a number of temple menorahs made throughout history. We know of at least 14 that were created throughout history. So
Is there a reason why it would be Miyake?
No, I don't think it would be makiv either, because there's no pasuk saying one way or another. There's no chazal teaching one way or another. So it's not really the thing. I'm just trying to say that don't do it like the menorah. So we've already seen 2 nafkaminas. The Rambam would say don't make yourself a big cubic house like the temple, and don't make a straight branched menorah, 7 branches. Whereas everyone else would say no, don't make it like the classic models of the temple, and don't make your menorah with a rounded branch and 7 branches.
Is this for Kelim? Is it like any form of depiction of them? Like if you made a little menorah, or is it something that's kasher?
It means you shouldn't make your kelim that you use around the house this way. You can make a little model menorah to show the kids because you're not using it as menorah, but you shouldn't make one that's the height of menorah and stuff and use that in your house. Like, you know what? Remember, that's what used to light the houses. They like candles around the house. Nowadays, you'd have to be a meshugana to want to illuminate your house with such a thing, or use a table that's like the shulchan. Some people wanted to do it. There's some people, by the way, lamad davar domam. There's some people very loyal Chabadniks. What do they try to make their house or their shul look like? They make it look like 770. You can understand why they do that. They have a real attachment to such a thing. I think there's a shul in Jerusalem which has an eerie look, like temple-style architecture, right? The Belzer shul. Why did they do that? What are they trying to invoke? They're trying to invoke the temple. So that's the type of things that we should avoid. Are you allowed to build a shul that looks temple-like? Okay, I don't know. Let's go on. Aval osehu menorah shel chamisha kanim o shel shmona kanim. A person can make himself a menorah with, I guess. Sorry, I didn't scroll up here. A person can make menorahs with other number of branches. That's why we get it. How many branches do our menorahs are? And by the way, there's I don't like the word Chanukiah. It's too new. It smacks of modernity. The proper term for the thing we light on Hanukkah is Ner Hanukkah. That's the halachic term. And if you refuse to say Ner Hanukkah, you want to say Chanukiah, you should at least say Menorah Chanukatit or Menorat Hanukkah. Okay? Or Menorat Hanukkah. That's the right way of saying it, but I don't like Chanukiah. The point is you can't make a menorah that has these number of branches. Or menorah she'ena matechet afal pi she'ish la shiva kanim. You can make a menorah that has 7 branches as long as it's not made of metal. Remember, we saw that the menorah not necessarily is not ma'akev, it's not made out of gold. They can make it out of inferior metal. Okay, next halacha. We've discussed this one many times because it's the basis for a lot of that which we discuss, and it is.
How do they make the? I'm sorry, this is a little bit not gone, but like when the Maccabean took over,
Yeah,
put it all together this like
spears.
To make sure it was spears. Well, don't those become so you're allowed? I mean, those are very tamei, right? Because they're from dead bodies.
Tuma dechuya b'tzibur. They had no choice. They needed to light the menorah. Okay.
Oh right.
Lahalot ner tamid.
Right.
They needed to do it, so that it was b'diavad.
Yeah.
There was a lot that they were doing. I think there's a teaching they say John Hyrcanus was boasting about this. A few decades later, a generation later, he was talking about how they had become very wealthy. The Maccabean kings had allowed the temple to become quite impressive because it had been despoiled by the Greeks. It was like no gold left, none of the kalim were left, and they had achieved quite a lot. He says we used to eat we had barely any food back in the day. Things have gotten a lot better. So yeah, they improved it. That's Chazal taught. They first used spears, and eventually they were able to make a proper menorah out of gold until they had 3. Yeah. So the halacha here says Shalosh machanot hayu Yisrael b'midbar. Machanei Yisrael v'hi arba machanot. The first is Machanei Yisrael. Remember, 4 camps. How did the Machanei Yisrael look? It looked basically like a square. On the north was Dan, Naphtali, Asher. On the east was Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun. South is Ruvain, Gad, Shimon, and west is Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin. Right? That's how you see in the pictures. Well,
I take your word.
So the 4 machanes. The 4 machanes, the 12 tribes are divided into 4. There's Machane Yehuda, includes Yisachar and Zevulun, that's on the east. Machane Ruvain includes Gad and Shimon, that's on the south. Machane Ephraim includes Menashe and Binyamin, that's on the west. Machane Dan on the north includes Naphtali and Asher. Okay? So the 4 tribes. Dan Yehuda, starting from the north. Dan Yehuda, Ruvain, Ephraim. And Levi's in the middle doesn't count as one of the tribes in this case because whenever you have to count 12. So when you exclude Levi, Ephraim and Menashe are counted separately. So that's how they did. So those are the 4 machanes that Rambam's referring to. Machane Levia. And then there's the inner camp, that's where Levites camped. Shnemar bah v'saviv la-mishkan yachanu. It says Levites just surrounded the Mishkan on all sides. So how did it work? There was Kahat to the south, and then Gershon, Merari, and to the east was just Moshe and Aaron's families. Okay, so that was the most spacious part of the camp, and they were guarding basically the entrance to the Mishkan. Umachane Shechina v'mipetach chatzar ol moed v'lifnim. Machane Shechina is from the entrance of the the chatzer of the ol moed, what's called the Azarah, and within. So uchnegdan lidorot, and forever there is this parallel. Where? Mipetach Yerushalayim ad Har Beit k'machane Yisrael. For the opening of Jerusalem, by the way, Jerusalem has many gates also. He's just saying you cross into Jerusalem, sanctified Jerusalem. There's an nafkamina between the current old city and what was sanctified Jerusalem, what's recognized as Jerusalem by Chazal. You've seen the map? It's a few pages before that, basically. Oh, Makbili has a map over here telling you, look, where's sanctified Jerusalem imposed on a map with modern old city of Jerusalem, which does not correspond to the way it used to be. It's the city's basically shifted northwards, and that's the first one. So everything in Jerusalem that's sanctified until Har Habayis, that's considered Machane Yisrael. That's Kim Machane Yisrael, even if it doesn't surround Har Habayis on all the sides. Correct? It doesn't seem to surround it. Har Habayis is basically concentrated in the east of this Machane. So yes, it does correspond halachically, but Physically, it doesn't correspond. Machane Israel does not entirely encompass Harabayas. Next.
Well, because it's technically.
What?
That's because technically not really feasible.
Yeah.
So they keep.
Yeah. Well, we could add to Jerusalem in the future, God willing. There's a process that we also saw, but for now they didn't do it. We Petach Harabayis ad Petach Hazarashu Shar Nikanor Kemachane Leviyah. From the entrance of Harabayis, by the way, there are many entrances. All Harabayis until basically the entrance of the inner courtyard, Shar Nikanor, that is Machane Leviyah, and that is a halachic nafkamina. When we Petach Hazarav Lifnim Machane Shechina, from the entrance of the Azara and beyond, that's called Machane Shechina. That corresponds to the Mishkanis that existed in the desert. This idea of the chel and the women's courtyard were two additions. Mala Yetira that the sages did. By the way, when we say sages, we don't mean the sages of the Talmud creating such a thing. We refer to, the prophets in the times of King Yehoshaphat, 2 generations or 3 generations after King Solomon himself. So this is not like we're talking about. This is even prophetic. This is the institutions. Okay. Kol Eretz Yisrael mikudeshem mikol haratzot. All of Eretz Yisrael is more sanctified than the rest of the lands. What's the nafkamina? This is we're gonna have to see. We had to share about this a few months ago. I'll give it the Kitzur version of this. What makes Eretz Yisrael holier? Without looking, okay. Cover up your yes. Ask you. What makes Eretz Yisrael holier than all the other lands? And by the way, those of you at home also, you can unmute yourselves. We're gonna get everybody offer what they think is what makes it holier. Yeah. That we made it holier because the Jews are there. Because it's kedushat arts. But what defines that? Remember.
No, but didn't we have to sanctify the land when we came in?
Yeah. Okay. Because it's sanctified. But sanctified, what does that even mean? Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe this, but I know it's the Rambam's answer. At least I think it's the Rambam's.
Oh, what you think? Okay.
That it has more mitzvahs. There are more mitzvahs regarding this land.
Okay, and you'll be surprised. What do you mean? What mitzvahs? What mitzvahs exist in Eretz Yisrael that don't exist in there? That's what I thought the answer would be, but that's wrong. Next. You're going to say that. Isn't that funny? What does the Rambam say? I would say the next line is Eretz Yisrael mikudesh b'kol aratzot umahi gedushata sheba chalot mitzvot hatiliot ba'aretz. That would be the answer because the Rambam talks about it. He gives a whole definition. It means a Hilchot Trumot. Here's Eretz Yisrael. Here's the sanctified area. That's where Shemitah applies. That's where Truma and Meiser applies. That's where etc. Chala, all these other mitzvahs. What does he say? Because that's where you can take, in order to bring to the temple, the Omer, that's the grain offering on the second day of Passover, and Shtei Lechem, that's the grain offering offered on Shavuot, the one day of Shavuot, and the Bikurim, the first fruits. Chadash, the problem is, according to the Rambam and others, Chadash applies even outside of Eretz Yisrael.
Oh, it's that only the grain from this land can be brought.
Can be brought as the korban, but once they bring this korban omer, chadash throughout the world is permitted. Masha ein mivi'in kain mishar arzo, which you cannot bring from other lands. You can't they can't find barley to bring that korban omer on the second day of Passover, so they'll bring from Egypt. Why do you say the mitzvot atzilut ba'aretz? It's a good question. As we saw last time, the answer is because there is a point in time where the land has no kedusha. For example, the Babylonian exile. The first kedusha was gone according to the Rambam, and the kedusha only came back when the Jews came back, which meant that all the mitzvot that you thought, Shemitah, Meiser, Truma, etc., those did not apply during that time. The land was completely not holy in that respect. However, if the Jews had gotten their act together and during Galut Bavel they wanted to offer sacrifice at the temple, just like the Jews eventually did, what was the first stage in rebuilding the temple in Zerubbabel's time? What did they first do? They came back to the land and they went to the side of the temple. They built an altar and they started bringing the korbanot, starting with what? Korban Pesach, of course. But Korban Pesach is not the first. They did an Korban Tamid, and then that day they did Korban Pesach. And then while they were offering the sacrifices, they started rebuilding the temple. So what the Rambam's bringing here is the mitzvahs that apply even when the land is not sanctified, so to speak. That is, you could have a time in history, Babylonian exile time, where you have to perform the temple service because that's a constant mitzvah, as we saw earlier. You have to bring the sacrifices. And if Shavuot or Pesach, like we see here, they got to bring the Omer or the Shtei Lechem, or Bikurim, those that time comes around, even if the land has not been re-sanctified by the Jews reconstituting themselves, their nation, their commonwealth, the land of Israel, they still have to bring these sacrifices dafka from the land of Israel. So this part of this facet of Kedusha is eternal and is always there. So that's why the Rambam mentions this. It's based on the Radbaz. Yeah, what?
Then how do we define the borders if this applies even when it's not?
Oh, so the Rambam's very clear about that. He says the borders first have to be we had a share about this. You guys weren't here. It was done online. The borders first have to fit in the place that Moshe Rabbeinu said, this is the land you're supposed to conquer. And then it has to be Ole Mitzrayim. They're the first ones to do it. And they're the ones who conquered it. And whatever the returnees from Babylon settled, that got Kedusha back. So it has to be an area within the Mosaic borders that had once been conquered by the Ole Mitzrayim, the people who had left Egypt, those who the first Commonwealth, and had been resettled during the times of the Second Commonwealth, or perhaps, as the Rambam says, during the times of the Third Commonwealth. That's what makes it Eretz Yisrael, within those areas.
So does that make our kibush makes the?
So he says Chazaka. He's going to speak about this soon. Now you're jumping ahead. So he's going to explain this answer. He's going to say, why do I even say this? Because he's going to be one's based on kibush and one's based on not. You gonna get there?
Here it makes it sound like it's kadosh because we bring the omer and the lechem bikurim in there.
Because the
But
mitzvahs
we
apply
only
there.
bring the lechem bikurim and the omer from the places that we.
The place that we're told to. No, but the place that we're told. That's why we have to rely on the Mosaic thing. They were told to conquer certain lands. Those lands will get kedusha, but it's also only from those lands that we could bring these mitzvot. You can't say like that's the Rambam says elsewhere. When he defines the land, he says areas are considered kibush yachid. Why? Because David HaMelech conquered them in the wrong order. So the Truma and the Meiser and the Shemitah don't apply there the same way they do in Eretz Yisrael proper. But if it's in the borders, you could still take the Korban Omer from those places.
You could take a korban omer from Ivar.
Technically, I guess. If that's not in the borders. That's the whole thing. It's not in the borders that Moshe Rabbeinu told them to do.
So
Okay?
that extension of.
So it's very interesting. Avar Yardain, you can't take these things from there. But even though Shemitah and Truma and Meiser apply 100% in Avar Yardain, nowadays it can't because there are no Jews there. Why are there no Jews in Transjordan? Because of ethnic cleansing. 48, yeah. Just, I tell you, it's the only people who've been successfully ethnically cleansed from real areas like so close, and they just take it without, they take it sitting down. It's Jewish people, by the way. They're the ones who submit to ethnic cleansing. Everybody else fights back. God willing, we'll get our spine back, and we'll get our land back. I think it happened in our lifetimes. You guys were babies. Do you know that the Gaza Strip was ethnically cleansed 17 years ago this week? Yeah. So that was a pretty traumatic thing for my generation. Yeah, it's a darn shame. Next. Aser Kedushothein be'eretz Yisrael. Within Eretz Yisrael, there's 10 levels of Kedusha. Where are they? Zo l'mala mizo. And like we said, the Maimonidean idea is that mitzvahs make something holier. More prohibitions or more positive commandments. So Eretz Yisrael is holier than the other lands only because it's from Eretz Yisrael where we take these products in order to bring the korban. Within Eretz Yisrael, what do we have? Ayarot amukafot choma mikudashot misha'ar haaretz. If you have a walled city, that is holier than the rest of Eretz Yisrael. Why? Shemishalchim mitochan et hamitzoraim. A prohibition applies. You have to kick out the mitzoraim, the people who have tzarat, various, not leprosy, but the other diseases that make them tameh. You have to kick them out of town. Where do they go? Now they camp outside the city walls. They could come into the city sometimes to daven and do other things, but they have to sleep outside. They have to make their residence there. The ein kovrin meit betochan ad sheyirtzu shiva tovei ha'ir ol kol anshe ha'ir. Can't bury a person within the city unless the town folk, the majority have said yes. Okay, or sorry, not majority. All of them have agreed to it, or the 7 members of the community board have agreed to it. You assume that these 7 tovei ha'ir, the 7 members of the board, they represent the people, and they've decided so you can make an exception.
The 7 members that are specifically the board. just mean,
That's I say a board. It means the 7 people are the Tovei Ha'ir. They know each other. They get together and they make communal decisions on behalf of everybody.
like, is a city allowed to have a different communal structure other than having it being ruled by 7 managers?
Well, that's the Jewish way of it. The question is, so are we allowed to have a Knesset and the Rabban and the what's Rabbanut instead of
I don't know, like
Sanhedrin?
even like mayors of cities versus a council of, let's say, 12 or 13 as opposed to 7. Or like,
So it's very interesting. In the Bible, what do we have? We don't have Tovei Ha'ir mentioned. We have Ziknei Ha'ir, and then we have Sar Ha'ir. A mayor is mentioned a few times in Tanakh. So the Sar was usually appointed by the king. For some other reason he's in charge. But Chazal assumed that a proper Jewish town has Tovei Ha'ir to make decisions. Just like a Sanhedrin is 23 and you have a Beit Din properly, that's ideal. And places actually kept this ideal, but there's some places they didn't. Well,
the Lakewood
next. Well,
I wanted to ask. It says,
please.
Shiva Tovei Ha'ir, Kol Anshe. Does that mean if the Shiva Tovei Ha'ir say yes and Kol Anshe Ha'ir say no?
Oh, what do you do if you have a machlokas between them? I don't know. I guess such thing would happen. They only asked if they either made it a plebiscite, ask everybody, or they just asked the town hall. By the way, that's the way most decisions are made, right? Wherever you live, the decision you barely ever get to make decisions. It's always the Tovei Ha'ir, the people who have the power, who decide what questions go to you. Correct? They frame the question the way they want. Do you guys vote? Maybe ever vote in an election here?
I voted in shul board meetings. I already know how it works.
So you know how it works. Basically, they present you the choice that you want to make, and they and if they don't get the answer they want, so they represent it or they try to that wasn't right. So I would trust Tovei Ha'ir. Basically, as I in my old age, I've become a lot more cynical. Less naive, more cynical, and realize that in regards to any political situation, it's always the people who are sitting there and deciding amongst themselves. And it's usually, you're lucky if it's 7 people, it's usually just 1 or 2 people together. And they frame it as a democratic process. Yeah, even here in Kochav Yaakov, it's like that apparently. We frame the question. It's very rare that you actually have a real democratic process work the way it was supposed to work. And I think even, let's say, the people who are most attuned to these issues, the founding fathers knew this also, which is why they basically had the president is chosen by what? An electoral college. And you would just hope that electoral college are the people who have the most at stake in this decision, so they'll make a proper decision, hopefully, right? Yeah. I kind of like the American system. What?
You should vote.
Well, yeah, but whatever. I tried to explain people American, these federalist ideas and things like that. Thomas Jefferson believed this and that, and Adams, etc. And there's the whole Madisonian idea, and it should be like this. And you see, the representation and stuff. They don't have this. They didn't teach them in high school constitutional and ideas, or anything Enlightenment ideas of rights. It's the Israeli tradition, which is Baruch Hashem. It's a good education, but their civics does no tradition of, let's say, Western style Magna Carta and all these things. They don't have that. They don't know it. They don't understand it. Yeah. You tell them the idea of the very idea that Chazal wouldn't have such a thing. The Romans came up with this ways to tax. Arnona. What is Arnona? You guys know what Arnona is? Sorry for the diversion. Well, you wish it was a property tax. A property tax would be good. Why? A guy who owns is usually using his property as an income, right? Property tax makes sense. The owner who could potentially derive profit could pay tax on that profit. So if I'm a landlord, for example, I rent out apartments, I would pay a property tax on those apartments also, correct? Shkoyach. Here in Israel, it's worse. If you're the renter, you pay the arnona. You pay a tax on your living space. Oh, but I'm already paying rent on this thing. I don't even own it. It doesn't generate me any income. I pay 40% of my annual income just on rent. So why am I paying arnona? It's a living space tax. It's calculated? It's calculated how much space you have. They count you. They come in with the laser thing and they check how much floor space you have in your house. You're looking at me like incredulously. Thank God. Thank God you're a bachelor. You should be married soon and have to rent an apartment.
Property taxes are even still bad because they discourage development. Now this encourages smaller spaces.
Yes,
They can be formulated in such a way that they encourage development.
Okay.
Well, they're not in Berkeley, California.
So hold on.
Well, that's definitely.
You are correct. I'm just trying to say that someone has to break apart this our culture here in Israel. This is not a Jewish thing. This is not necessarily an Israeli thing, but it exists in Israel, and it's assumed of course you pay arnona because to whom do we pay Arnona here in Kochav Yaakov to the local government? There's a local council. It's not even a town council, it's a number of towns. So I remember one guy who was the son of a higher up who's involved in the local council and here, like always involved in everything, said, how is the local council supposed to make any money? So I said, I don't know, do like in America. If really you live in a less well-run state in America, so they take a little bit of income tax also, in addition to what the federal government takes, correct? New York does that. Or you could be smart like the state of Florida and run your state so well that your state could actually generate its own income so that the state does not have to charge an income tax or other such taxes, right? That's the good way of doing it. If the Moatzah, that's the local council, wants to make money, so let the Moatzah do like a normal person and learn to make money. Isn't that a great idea? Like instead of just telling the person, the Avrech, who will actually they give discounts to people who are in Kollel. But the point is, a regular guy has to pay, in addition to his income tax, he just has to pay, you know what, here's how much space you have in your house. It, like you said, it discourages the building of houses. Yes, it's a bad thing. The Torah doesn't endorse such a thing. The Torah never said to do such a thing. It's just a bad idea that got hold. And, well, it brings money. So you have to start re-educating people to get out of this. So we don't have that. Let's get back to the Rambam. Too much of a tangent here. If they already brought they decided they were going to bury him outside the city, they take him to the cemetery. He's out of the walls of the city already, so they can't bring him back in. That's what makes a walled city holier than the rest of Eretz Yisrael. An unwalled city doesn't have this distinction. And of course, anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, you can make a cemetery, but we also see there's halachas. You shouldn't just put cemeteries in Eretz Yisrael wherever you want. You should put them away from where people will go, and ideally underground in caves. That's the way they used to do it, and that prevents land from becoming contaminated. Ratzu b'nei ha'ir lo tzii ha'kever min ha'medina mefanim oto. They buried a person within the Medina. What's the Medina? It doesn't mean the state. They say it means the walled city. Medina is another word, as Rambam says, for a walled city. So they buried him within the walled city. So eventually they could say, you know what? We want him out of here. God willing, there's 2 Jordanian kings or whatever buried on the Har Bayis. So yeah, isn't that terrible? It's actually marked. You can go see it. It's a terrible, terrible thing. God willing, I hope to be among those who will be removing those. Okay, putting it where. Thank God. I think our garbage dump is somewhere in the Negev. So, okay, next. Ratzu b'nei ha'ir lo tzii ha'kever min ha'medina mefanim oto. L'chok farot mefanim chutz b'kever navi o melech. They could do this to any grave that had been put in the city. They could eventually remove it when they want to, except for that of a prophet or a king. Okay, so if the king had been buried there for whatever reason, or the prophet had been buried there, it stays there. So if it's suffix, it's just a regular person. Most of the things, there's no reason to believe. If no reason to believe it's a king's grave, if it's one or two, it's either king or commoner, and they know it's just one of them 50-50, so that's a suffix.
Yeah, I mean, like, but they say that
it's suffix there.
David or whatever isn't actually.
Okay, so that is that, but yeah, that's
they
a church.
wanted the Machon for something.
Yeah, they wanted the Machon for something else. I'm not going to say there are many people who are, well, what do you call it? They're emotionally attached to it. It's not within the walls of the old city, anyways, but technically it's in the Kedusha area. So, yeah. So what would you do? The problem is we're going to see that the Malchei Beit David were buried within Jerusalem. That's a good thing. Okay, they were buried in Ir David. That's their special allowance. And also prophets can be buried there. That's why we have to see this exception here. So we're not going to be removing Kever David even if it's just a suffix. Kever Hikifatu Ha'ir. What happened is they buried this fellow outside the city, but then the city expanded. And they've extended the walls of the city. So now he's within the wall of the city. Had the city come in, actually he's actually within all 4 walls, or the city's just surrounded him. It's grown a tail. So the outside of the city surrounds him. The city surrounds him from the outside. You understand how that can be?
Yeah.
The city wall expanded and sort of engulfed him. So now he's engulfed by city walls, but only from 2 sides. You know, the city expanded around him, and the walls basically go around the grave.
So you mean a peninsula?
Yeah.
With the city being one.
Yes. So if you had a case like that, there's still 50 amas between the grave, him, they say him and the city. They cannot move the grave unless everybody agrees to do so. But if the grave is already within 50 amas of the city, so they could move it farther out. That's something that unfortunately they have to do. It's a terrible thing to have to move out graves. But then again, people didn't stay in their graves long time, for the long term, what they used to do in the olden days. Eventually, they would come back and empty the grave, make room for the next person, and put the bones in the ossuary, right? We discuss this next. The 14th halacha. Jerusalem's even holier than the rest of these cities. Within the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, that's where you eat the minor holy sacrifice. I mean, sacrifice that anybody but a Kohen can eat. Kohanim ate the kodesh kachim in the temple, and all the other sacrificial foods are eaten by regular Jews outside the temple within the city of Jerusalem. Korban Pesach is included in this one. So when we eat Korban Pesach, we'll have to do it the area shown on that map. And that's also where you eat the second tithe. Maaser Sheni is not given to anybody in particular. It's kept by the person who grew the produce, and he uses it for himself, or he redeems it for money, and eventually buys food within Jerusalem. This is a machal mishteh, whatever he wants to eat or drink, and he uses that. But that's what he eats within the walls of the old city. Now another Chazal's teachings. These are not necessarily explicit in the Torah. These aren't things. The first two you could find in the Torah. It says you have to eat the kachim kalim in God's place, and also the Maaser Sheni will be eaten in the place God chooses. In these two cases, Mikdash, that says in the place God shall choose, he's referring to Jerusalem, not just the Mikdash. As Rambam said, sometimes Mikdash even means Jerusalem. So here he says, these are Chazalic teachings. Ein malidin ba'et hameth. Cannot leave the dead person there overnight. You have to take him out to bury him right away. And indeed, that's what they used to do. Old Yeshuvniks, their stories, they had to do a funeral late at night, Motzei Shabbos. Why? A guy died on Shabbos. They aren't going to wait until Sunday morning to take him out to bury him. They are going to have the funeral overnight, in the middle of the night even, because you're not supposed to leave a dead person overnight within the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. They don't bring someone's remains around in there. They just go quickest exit. We don't rent out houses there. Well, how do I make any money? So what do? You own it, but I guess if people stay there, you're not supposed to charge them rent. You're supposed to let them stay, gratis.
So
yeah.
Does that mean if you have people who are running aksaniot for like aliyah regel, they can't charge anyone any money?
Yeah, that's the thing. Exactly.
Why would anyone want to do that?
Well,
I guess out of the kindness of their hearts. But...
Yeah, it's kindness. It's called kindness of A lot of people in Jerusalem are very hospitable, by the way. That was the thing. If you want to live in Jerusalem, you want to own a house there, you just know you're not making any rent money off of that. This is an ideal situation. Unfortunately, nowadays, there are a lot of people who do own in, let's say, the old city, and there are people who rent out. Or you rent from Arabs. There's or other Gentiles who own in the old city. This halacha can't apply to them. Maybe we should impose this law on them. But ideally, there was no such thing. Next. We don't let a ger toshav there. See? What was a ger toshav? That's a good Gentile fellow who's cooperative with us and has accepted the Torah and the commandments. He's still a Gentile. He could still eat. He could eat, non-kosher food. He could do what he wants. But we don't allow him to live in Jerusalem. Let him live in Hever. Let him live in somewhere else, but not in Jerusalem. We don't put graves in the city, except for, like I just said, Malchei Beit David. Well, there's a Kivrei Beit David, the Davidic house, and also there was one prophetess who was actually buried in Jerusalem. It was Huldah, the prophetess from Jeremiah's time. So she was buried there, but we don't bury anybody else there. It so happens since the destruction of the temple, there hadn't been any Davidic kings or prophets. Second temple times, there were no, although they were waiting for such people. So those are the graves that are within the Jerusalem, but we're not adding to those. We don't plant within them ganot and pardesim, was basically gardens and orchards. A nice open space. Why? What would be the problem? You have to do a little bit of groundskeeping there. We're not talking about agriculture here. We're talking about, for beauty. Problem is, stuff to use fertilizer. Yeah, that's the problem. By the way, the only way you could use fertilizer was in the olden days. What was it? Yeah, behemoths. So that's something they didn't want. Nowadays, still, some good fertilizer is the stinkiest stuff. Well, we use chemical fertilizer in our gardens. What do we use? These little pellets you put in the dirt. So perhaps now Chazal would make a distinction. or just chemicals you add to the water. That does just as good a job, if not better, right? You guys farm anything? Ever try to grow anything?
Other plants stuff. And
Yeah.
in the U.S., we grew tomato.
They sell you go to the Kobo, they sell you a pack of these colorful little pellets, and you just put it into the earth and it does the trick. Or saying you put a drip into the water. So it does the trick. There's no smell. So that works just as well. Perhaps they would make a distinction, but at least classically, we didn't have such a thing. You had to use, behemoth manure. Next. So we don't plant in there. We don't plow the areas anywhere. Even if there's an open space within the city, we don't do that. Once again, this is because of the whole thing. You'd have to. It causes a smell. You don't want that. And we don't have trees. Okay. Except for there's a few rose bushes there that were there from what? I thought you were signaling something. Okay. There's other things that all involve fertilization. We don't have any garbage heaps. By the way, the modern idea of a garbage dump is something really new because we have all these things that don't biodegrade and very wasteful. In the olden days, what was the garbage dump? What was a garbage pile? Everything was biodegradable. You have a little bit outside town, you just dump, leftovers from food, etc. Most things were gone within a year. If whatever the animals would take, they would take, and other things would just biodegrade. The vegetable peelings and stuff, leftovers from supper, were barely there a week later. Okay, but either way, you should not have a place where you just dump household waste within Jerusalem.
Isn't Ashpot sometimes used as an outdoor public bathroom in some places in Kosovo?
It could be, but that's not what we're referring to because you're going to see there's a next one. That's Beit Akise, like we saw before. Ashpot is not in this case. It means where people would dump their household waste. Vein motziin mena zizim ug zuz trayot. Zuz trayot. I says zuz trayot. What do you have? Zuz trot? Okay. What does it have in Machon Mamre? How does he spell it? It's Gus Raot. I have Rayot. Okay. It's a foreign word. You shouldn't have basically anything protruding from the walls of the buildings. A person's walking in Jerusalem, by the way, the old city, it's amazing. The streets are basically just walkways between the buildings, right? So you shouldn't have awnings, even the balconies protruding from there. Why? Because that causes an ohel problem. A person standing underneath an ohel with, let's say, they're bringing out the dead person, that will just transmit tumah. So the buildings have to be flush. They shouldn't have anything protruding from them. Next. No furnaces, nothing that makes a large fire. Who used to use kivshonot in the olden days? Why would you have a kivshon? For mass heating of water, and more for blacksmithing. Metal smithing involves having large fire. And nowadays, how do we do this? How do we even cook or anything? Thank God we use natural gas, and natural gas does not produce smoke. But it used to be doing certain things was very smoky, so you don't have smoke pollution in Jerusalem. Okay, good. Ve'ein megadlin ba tarnagolin mipnei hakodashim. You can't have a person with a chicken coop there because of the kachim. Chickens go out and about and they peck at everything, and they might bring in. You ever seen it? Chickens can find like dead lizards. Lizards die in the sun sometimes. Have anybody seen a dead lizard on the street here?
Yep.
Yeah, I found a few around the house. Okay, it's kind of cool. So chickens would find a thing like that. That's a dead sheretz. That's a whole dead sheretz that can make people contaminated. That can destroy contaminated food. You're on your way to do Korban Pesach that night of Pesach, and you come into contact with this dead sheretz. It means you're going to be, you're not pushed off to Pesach Sheni because you did Korban Pesach properly in the day. You just don't get to eat Korban Pesach now. You're going to go sit at those other people are using that old Haggadah, not the new Haggadah. You're going to have an old-fashioned Seder, right? So it's not good to have such a thing. So too, Kohanim in their Kohen cities, in Novir Kohanim, they should not have a chicken coop. Kohanim should not have chickens. Yeah, the Levites can have a chicken because the Levites don't deal with kudshim. What taros do the Kohanim have all year round? Truma. A Kohen who comes in contact with this dead lizard and his chicken brought into the house, so that Kohen has ruined his truma, and all day he's going to have to wait until tomorrow night before he can eat his stuff, right? So Kohanim shouldn't have chicken coops. The ein abayit nechlat ba. What is nechlat? That means it was sold. House was sold within Jerusalem. Normally, there's this rule that a person who sells the house Sorry about that. Him or his family have the right to rebuy the house right away. Otherwise, the sale will be permanent. So there's no such thing as a permanent sale of a house within Jerusalem. You familiar with these halachot? That's one of the 15 cases in Tanakh where it's written Lamed Aleph, which means no, but it's read as though it's spelled lo with a vav. Wait, they're pronounced exactly the same way. Silent Aleph, silent vav. What's the difference? The answer is what your intention is. It doesn't mean that doesn't have a wall. It means it has a wall. Yesh lo choma. However, it's trying to teach you, the Kriyan Ksiv tells you that even if the wall fell down, it still has the holiness. Okay? The point is, this halacha does not apply in Jerusalem. A person sells the house, it's not nechlat. He could technically buy it back, it's his ancestral property. The rule is, a field that's sold eventually goes back into the Yovel to the ancestral owners. A house in the city, once it's sold, it's sold. The original owners only have a year to buy it back. And once the year hits, and this is, by the way, the nafkamina, Adar, is it 12 months or is it the year to the date? And the answer is year to the date, and that's one of the points we know that the Adar Sheni, it just means the guy gets an extra month to do this. Okay. Next, it cannot become a wayward city. What's an Irani Dachat, halachically speaking? Well, if they found that through due process, they found that the majority of the inhabitants had worshipped idols, so it's declared an Irani Dachat. What's the nafkamina? So it's a wayward city. What do? You have to destroy it and put everybody to death by the sword. We just do decapitation. Normally, an idolater is put to death through what? Skila, stoning. In this case, they found everybody's killed by the sword. Killed by the sword means decapitation. Okay, different form of death, and they destroy everything within the city. So they cannot do that to Jerusalem. Even if chas v'shalom, they would have set up a bunch of courts and find that, oh my God, everybody in Jerusalem is worshiping idols. So too, you cannot declare it an Irani Dachat. You just have to kill the individual idol worshippers. Next, Vena mivya egla rufa. How do you do this? Oh, this shouldn't happen, but if you find the person dead out in the middle of nowhere between the towns, they have to measure which town is closest. Jerusalem ends up the closest town, it's still not going to count. They're not going to send out their Zakanim to go do this whole Eglah Rufa ritual. So who's going to do it? Maybe no one's going to do it. They're just not going to skip it this time. Okay. Jerusalem was not divided among the tribes. Really? Where does it say that Jerusalem was not divided among the tribes? What does it even mean? Where in Sefer Yeshua does it say that? No, he's talking about Sefer Yeshua. He's talking about his history. If you look in Sefer Yeshua, it mentions that the king of Jerusalem was among the kings that fought against Joshua and lost. And he's on the list. Melech Yerushalayim Echad, just like Melech Hebron.
Yeshua had his own portion, and I think there were a few others who had their own portion.
So it turns out that it says that the children of Judah attacked the city and burned it. And they just left it there. And it turns out in the olden days, there was two Jerusalems. There's upper city and the lower city. The northern half was called Yevus, and that was occupied by the Yevusi. And it turns out the border between these two tribes, Yehuda and Binyamin, described twice in Sefer Yeshua, their border went up over through the Guy Ben Hinnom and basically went up on what described as Har Habayis and cuts across Har Habayis. That's in Sefer Yeshua mentioned. That's the border between Yehuda and Binyamin. Goes right across Har Habayis, basically east-west across Har Habayis. That's kind of strange, and right through the city of Yevus, and just to the south is Jerusalem. So the Bnei Binyamin didn't touch the city for whatever reason. It's mentioned in the end of Yeshua, the beginning of Sefer Shoftim. Each tribe had its own shortcomings, except for Shevet Yehuda. There's some places they didn't conquer. Some places they conquered, they didn't drive them out. Some places they just settled among the Canaanites, etc. That's not a good thing. It's a criticism of Am Yisrael. So basically, the southern half of the city was left as a wasteland and not settled by Judeans, and the northern half was left Gentile by the Bnei Binyamin. So there were no Jews who went and got, this says it on at least an official document that this is supposed to be my ancestral land. In Yeshua's time, what'd they do? Each tribe got its spot on the map, and that spot was subdivided among the men who were there, correct? Each man got, this is your official place in perpetuity, it belongs to your family, and make sure that when the Oval comes, if you sold the land, developed it, do whatever you want, it has to go back to your heirs. That is how the halacha works. And that's what did work. But there was no Jew who could say that, oh, look at this, I have documents from the time of Yeshua saying that I own these plots of land in what is Jerusalem. And that's why David HaMelech had a good opportunity. Oh, this place, there's a big hole in the middle of Eretz Yisrael in his time that was not occupied by Jews. It had not been divided among them. There's no, every other place in Eretz Yisrael, you could find someone to whom this belonged, even if that land had been retaken by Canaanites or been taken over by Plishtim. Or what happened to Shevet Dan? They had a whole area of land that they couldn't control, and it says that the Canaanim pushed them out again. It was retaken by Gentiles. There were areas also mentioned in Sefer Shmuel that when Saul was killed in battle, neighboring areas of Jews, by the way, I don't mean Jews, I mean Israelites in the Galil picked up and crossed over the Jordan River, and they became refugees because the Philistines took over their area. But they still knew that one day there's going to arise a Jewish king, his name was David, and he's going to get this back for us. So we're holding on to it. We're not losing our documentation that this is our land. But there were no Israelites in the time of King David who could say, yes, I own an ancestral plot of land in what's today known as the double city of Jerusalem, Upper Jerusalem and Lower Jerusalem. It had not been divided. Someone's entering. Okay. Hold on 1 second. We'll let him in. Okay. So that's what it means. The land, it was never divided up among the people. So whoever came with King David and settled in the city basically got those houses. It was a one-time deal. And by the way, I think that's how the modern Old City was divided up. How did people come to own in the Old City? They're basically, what?
Originally, they just kind of showed up.
Yeah. There's some people came back. There's some people who were living in Katamon. They wanted their houses back. The Arabs had destroyed a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people couldn't get back what they wanted, but a lot of people they were the first ones to show up there, and they're like, I want a house here. And it was kind of cheap back in the day. It's a shame that they didn't do that to the whole entire so-called Old City. It could have been a much more Jewish place, but whatever. It's pretty bad. Well, it looks like you had a question about this, Shmuel. No. Next.
No, it just sounds too good to be true. Like, imagine it's like, I mean, just at a minimum, the real is but at a maximum, like, what it actually is, a piece of the city. It's like, and it's cheap. Amazing.
Not only that,
but
but the promise is that when you conquer the land, there were certain Jews who had the privilege. They conquered the land. They even got a homestead, which is a nice big house and fields. What's inside the house? Furniture and food. Money, batimili in kultuv asher molilita. You're going to come into land. Those who are tzaddikim and merit this, they're going to inherit some Canaanite guy's house. They're going to beat some Amorite in war. He's gone. They're going to even be able to eat the non-kosher food in his refrigerator. That's for the Jewish people to eat. Doesn't they hate? Rambam limits it, says no, because it's inconvenient to find other food. But according to Ramban, it's a blanket permission. He has some pork sausages in the fridge. I don't know. I don't have a Yetzer Hara for such thing. I probably wouldn't, whatever. But apparently some people like it. He has his shrimp cocktails in there. Go ahead and eat that. That's his. Just like it says, you'll come and find fields. You didn't plant those fields. You didn't plant those orchards. You're going to be able to go take the first crop of grapes and olives. You didn't work on that. That's going to be ready for you to take.
Oh, that's in how is it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Pay attention. Yeah. What?
How is it different?
The surah, because
if there's chazir, why is
so Chazal say the Torah permitted it explicitly. It says batim equal to. You have the right. God gave it to you.
Who says the chazir is too?
Well, because it tastes good. It's just not kosher to you. You shouldn't say, "Oh God, it's disgusting. Why would everyone eat a cheeseburger?" It seems that a lot of Gentiles actually enjoy these other foods. They're called toevas. Toeva is, by the way, the seafood. Chazal, the Torah doesn't call eating, some wild animal, some wild game that's a behema, a chaya tamea. It doesn't call that toeva, and it doesn't call milk and meat toeva. There's nothing toeva about milk and meat. This is kosher. This is kosher. You combine them. Why shouldn't it be kosher? It's xeris akasiv that you shouldn't eat milk and meat, but there's nothing inherently disgusting or yeah. So that's the machlokas Rambam and Ramban. What does the Torah describe? It means like the soldiers because it's inconvenient for them to go back and get some food. That's the Rambam says, or is it like the Ramban says? It means God promised this as straight heter, and an nafkamina would be, and the Ramban says he limits it and says it was only the original conquest. Rambam says it's every war. Ramban says Moshe Rabbeinu's time. Okay, so they each have their own limits, and some would say, no, it applies to every single war and applies to everything. The nafkamina would be, what if you had leftover food? The guy found those sausages, he was where Yeshua there, and he lived to Ehud ben Gera's time. There's already kosher sausages available in Eretz Yisrael, but he saved some in the refrigerator from the conquest of shalvim back with Shevet Dawn. So can he take those sausages out of the fridge and eat them? According to one Rishon, or many Rishonim, what he's eating now is heter. It's heter is heter. And according to the Rambam, it's not heter anymore. You're not in time of war. You're not the soldier. You know, you had a permission back then, but you don't have permission now.
There's one opinion that says it applies to all wars.
Yeah.
So does that mean
Rambam.
if when we came and conquered parts of the land, we went into some Arab's refrigerator?
Yeah, so that was in 67, the Jews who conquered Ramallah and the old city of Jerusalem. So they needed food right there. You know, yeah, technically they're not starving necessarily, but it's, they just finished the battle, and it's inconvenient for them to walk back to, I don't know, to Givat, what's it called? Where is it? Next to Givat Shaul. Thank you. I'm thinking that what's right next to it is Kiryat Moshe. Kiryat Moshe and Givat Shaul to go, have a sandwich so they could eat, the halal stuff that they find in the house they've just kicked the Arabs out of. Yes, they could do that. Very interesting. That's the halacha. We're going to see it's in Hilchot Malachim there. The Ramban has a whole challenge with the Rambam. The Rambam's, it's in his Parish on the Torah, where he talks about the Rambam's definition of this dispensation, and the Ramban has a slightly different understanding about it. I think the Ramban, by the way, doesn't give a good enough proof to the Rambam. The Rambam says every war, it seems that way. Why? What's the Rambam's proof? The Ramban, Nachmanides, says it's only the war of conquest, Yeshua's wars, because that's the case discussed in the Gemara. What if a guy had leftovers from the Yeshua war sometime later? So the Ramban is correct. Yeah, the Gemara discusses the Yeshua war, but doesn't mean it's limited to that war. That's just a war, for example. That's the war they used as the example, but doesn't mean it's limited to that case. The Rambam could be right. It applies to every war in the future. The Maccabean wars also. Okay, good question. The point is, you have this promise from God that you'll have land, that you don't need to work. You'll have houses filled with food already. It's all yours if you keep it.
It's not just for a war against Shivat HaYim.
Yeah, so that's the way the Rambam understands it. Ramban understood it as specifically the war against Canaanites the first time around. So maybe that would be a good cheer to see the Ramban's challenge the Rambam on this one, on the 5 different points, how he disagrees with the Rambam on 5 different points. Okay, who knows? Maybe the halacha is not exactly like any of them. Harabayit mikudash mimena. Harabayit is even more sanctified. This is the halacha we're scrolling up to right here. It's even more sanctified than the rest of Jerusalem. In what and how? Shein zavim v'zavot v'didot v'yodot nichnasim l'sham. Remember, we've seen this also. This is the Mishneh. We had a shir about this in the Mishneh. Says that Harabayis, that's the Temple Mount, is even holier. That you can't have zavim zavot. Those are people with different types of emissions. For a man, it's you hope you don't have it. It's basically a disease. For a woman, it's basically similar to having her period, but at the wrong times. So those places, all these people cannot go into Harabayis until they purify them. This is the thing I said wrong. No. There's no such thing. A mate can't move himself. Technically speaking, if you have to, for whatever reason, technically, you could bring even a dead person to Harabayis. The people who are carrying the dead person themselves are contaminated through contact with the dead. So this means a person who is contaminated through death impurity, of course, can go into Harabayis, and this is the thing that has to be stressed, because people believe nowadays you're all Tmei Mate. No, Harabayis is a big place. There's a lot of places where Tmei Mate can go. Person who's just, he's not the dead person himself. He's been in contact with the dead, or been in the same ohel. He walked over a grave, etc. He touched a piece of metal that touched the dead person. So these people can go into Harabayis.
Why isn't it say voluntary if somebody touched the shins?
That's assumed, because even a Tmei Mace can go. A Tmei Mace is even more tummy than them. So you're going to see that. I think you have a nice chart there by Makbili, which I don't have. It tells you each line tells you who can't go in this place. And if you haven't had your name called yet, it means you're allowed to go in. Okay? Yeah. Next. The chel is even more sanctified. Goyim and Tmei Meis and Boel Nida are not allowed to go in there. Okay? A Boel Nida is not exactly Nida himself, but he shouldn't go in there. That's what Chazal instituted. And they even dug up the old plaque that said no Gentiles beyond this point. Right? You've seen it. You can see a picture of it. It's in museums. Next. Ezrat Nashim Mikudesha Minachel Shein Tvul Yom Nichnas L'Sham. Implying Tvul Yom was allowed on until this point. Right? So a Tvul Yom could go up to the Ezrat Nashim. This is Zemi Divrehem, as we saw. This is a rabbinic enactment because a Tvul Yom could technically go into what was the Ezrat Nashim. V'Amina Torah Mutar Tvul Yom Likanes LaMachaneh Leviyah. A Tvul Yom is allowed into Machaneh Leviyah, implying what? That anybody who's not Tvul, if you haven't gone to mikveh yet, you shouldn't go into Machaneh Leviyah. If you have a reason to go to mikveh first before going to Har Bayis. That's the general rule. The Tamei Shenichnas is Ezrat Nashim Eino Chayav Chatat. A Tamei who goes into the Ezrat Nashim because of the rabbinic enactment that the Ezrat Nashim has this higher level of kedusha, there is no punishment. Pater Aval Aser. So he doesn't have to bring this chatat. So the person who's Tamei who goes into the Azara itself, that's the person who has to bring the sin offering. Ezrat Yisrael Mikudeshet Me Ezrat Anashim. What's Ezrat Yisrael? That's the Azara, where they actually did the sacrifice. The courtyard in which the altar stood and where all the sacrifices had to be slaughtered. Shein Mechusar Kippurim Nichnas L'Sham. A Mechusar Kippurim cannot go in there. What's a Mechusar Kippurim? Give me a Mechusar Kippurim. The Zav, the Mitzorah, the Yoledet. They have to bring sacrifice, but they can't go in. So what do? They bring their sacrifice up to the gate, and they hand it off to their shaliach or to the kohen to process for them. And once the process is over, and they have achieved their kippurim, their atonement, for whatever reason, their purification is over, and then they could go into the Azara. But until that point, they can't. So every woman who's ever given birth is in this category. Because she's a Yoledet, she's a Mechusar Kippurim, and also Gerim. Anybody who's converted to Judaism is in this category, technically speaking. So what are they going to do? How are they going to eat Korban Pesach? It means all of these folks who need to achieve Kippurim are going to either also bring these sacrifices, usually 2 birds, whatever it may be, or they at least have to pay the temple fund, the shaliach, the officially appointed kohanim who take all the funds, and there's a box where they just put in all their money for this sacrifice, and the kohanim are in charge of processing a certain number of sacrifices that day on behalf of all these people. You could do this. That's what they used to do. You look skeptical about this shmuel. It's 100%. It's mentioned in Shkolim. They have these types of things, these funds for this purpose. So all these people, aside from doing Korban Pesach, any woman who's ever given birth in her life will have to make sure that the Kohanim process her birds beforehand so that she can be eligible to eat a Korban Pesach. Kind of wild, right? Luckily, if you're a man, you don't have to assume that maybe B'Safek you were once a Zav or once a Mitzorah or some other Mechusar Kippurim. If you're a Ger, yes, you have a little bit of an issue. You have to make sure to at least hand over the money for your sacrifice. You're supposed to know that if you converted to Judaism at some point in your life, you're still, even though you're completely a Jew, you've been to mikvah, you've had your circumcision, you still are lacking your sacrifice, and you should make sure to bring it. Don't take some money right now and say, okay, this is for my sacrifice, because that'll sanctify the money. Just know that you'll eventually have to do this with your money.
What if you have a lot of money? Maybe it's a good thing to do that.
No, then you ruin the money. You just put it in danger, because if, let's say, the ger says, you know what, this $400 are for buying, getting a nice big korban for when it happens, and he dies, then his children are unaware of the fact that these $400 are now sanctified. So that could be a problem. So you shouldn't do that. Let's see here. Ezrat Yisrael Mikudeshet, fine. We saw that. The Tamei Shenichnas La Chayav Karet. A Tamei who goes into the temple courtyard, the inner courtyard, what's called Ezrat Yisrael, just the Azara. So he is obligated to bring a sin offering. He has violated a commandment. He is basically Chayav Karet. So he has to bring a sin offering for that. And you really shouldn't do that. Ezrat Kohanim Mikudeshet Mimena. Ezrat Kohanim was an area within the Azara where only Kohanim were supposed to stand. Shein Yisrael Nichnasim Sham Ela Bishat Tzorchehem. Israelites are only allowed to go in there if they have a real reason to. They're bringing sacrifice. Right now is the time of slaughter. What days was it full of Jews? Erev Pesach, because every Jew shows up. Even not every Jew, just the representatives of a lot of Jews are there. There's a lot of goats, there's a lot of Jews. So they're there. What are the it's not for prayer, by the way. A Jew says, I want to daven the Azara today. They're going to say, sorry, but no admittance. If he says, I need to place my hands upon the sacrifices, smicha they used to do on the korban, or I want to perform the act of slaughter, or I have something to wave. What is waving?
sacrifice, they take the fats.
Well, sometimes it's the Kohanim, but there's certain things that, a Nazir and other offerings, the heave offering, Bikurim, etc.
Wait,
Yeah.
is the Messiah also doing at some point?
Who? Yes, he has a wave offering also. All sorts of wave offerings. Vehenif, a tenufa, is basically like this. It's up and down and like this. It's not shaking like you do your lulav. As you know, the proper way to do lulav not necessarily is a shaking. What do you do with the lulav? Moli kumevi, back and forth, up and down like that. That's a tenufa. So they used to perform these acts where all sorts of offerings had to be done. So that's what an Israelite does.
They do it with the Levi.
So a Levi is an Israelite for this purpose.
No, as in isn't for which parasha? Didn't say they did.
No, it says Aaron had to pick up every Levite and also wave him in order to sanctify them. So it means that Aaron did that to 22,000 men, including his brother and his nephews. Kind of amazing, right? Yeah, every single Levi had this. Moshe Rabbeinu, you're gonna think about it, like what happened to Korach, that happened to Moshe Rabbeinu. You think of Moses, like all Charlton Heston and everything with a nice beard and everything like that. He even had his eyebrows shaved when the Mishkan was dedicated. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was there at the dedication of the Mishkan, looked like basically a monk. No, you have to think about that.
I'm laughing because I'm half Japanese, so I'm just thinking this is a very familiar concept too.
Okay, so that's a strange thing that was required of them. They did this to Tiglachas Dalat.
Right.
Was done to a few people even in temple times. People had to mamish shave off everything. Okay, that was a ritual purification. Very interesting. And it doesn't matter man or woman. The woman who was in this position also had the same thing. My daughter asked me, a girl who takes on Nizirut, will she have to cut off her hair? And the answer is yes. The laws of Nizirut apply equally to men and women. As far as I understand, I could be wrong on this one, but it seems that they also, if a woman took on Nizirut, that means that at the termination of her Nizirut, she would then cut off all her hair. And they use it. They throw it under the fire to burn. They cook that sacrificial meat was cooked in a pot that was over a fire in which the Nazir would throw his hair. So that was something that they had to do. But
Who doesn't love the smell of burning hair?
just a little bit, it's a ceremonial. It's not. Beino ulam v'lam mizbeach mikudash mimeno. The area between the ulam, that means the antechamber, the outer room of the temple, and the mizbeach was even more sanctified. She'ein ba'alei mumin u'furei rosh u'krei begadim nichnasim l'sham. Furei rosh doesn't mean people are not wearing yarmulkes. It means blemished kohanim. A blemished Kohen cannot serve in the temple, so he doesn't dress as a Kohen, but he still shows up as an Israelite to bring a sacrifice like anybody else. So he should not go there. Ufurei rosh, Kohanim with long hair. A Kohen who wants to serve has to have the opposite haircut of a Nazir. A Nazir has to grow his hair for at least 30 days. A Kohen cannot have more than 30 days growth of hair on top of his head. That's called pera rosh. A Kohen with more than 30 days growth of hair on his head. He's disqualified from service, as we will see and as we saw. So those Kohanim, he's like, well, it's not my turn. It's like I serve in Av, not in Elul. So I haven't had my hair longer right now for whatever reason. Machlokas Rishonim, by the way, if that's allowed even. But assuming this Kohen did grow his hair, which he shouldn't have, according to this Rishon, so he should still not go in this area between the Ulam and the Zbeach. And those who have ripped clothing. Why would a person have ripped clothing? Well, it just got ripped accidentally, or he was an Avel for whatever reason. Okay? He has to wear proper clothing there. The temple edifice is even more sanctified than the area between the Ulam and Zbeach. Only Kohanim on duty and also have properly washed their hands and feet. They're allowed to go in there. By the way, they shouldn't just go in there stam. It's usually for a service. What service is the most minimal service that all Kohanim have a chance to do during the day? We saw it earlier. It's at the end of the day's service. At one of the Talmud of the morning or the afternoon, Kohen Gadol goes in first just to bow down. He bows down fully and other two Kohanim escort him. And then it's the turn for every other Kohen who is on duty to just go into the temple and prostrate himself. So only Kohanim who have ritually donned the clothing and washed their hands and feet can go and do this service. It could be that there are many Kohanim on duty that one day there's not enough jobs to go around. There's a Korban Tamid. How many Kohanim do a Korban Tamid? Well, we saw that. We're going to see this again. It's not more than 20. There's only so many jobs that can go around. But the other Kohanim who are on duty, at least they can have a chance to bow down in the temple. No, excuse me for a second. Very itchy here. Next. Beit Kodesh HaKodeshim Mikudash Mimenu. The Holy of Holies is even more sanctified. And this is an important point with the argument they had with those Rabbanim last year. Some say, what makes the Holy of Holies holy? That's where the Ark of the Covenant is. No. It's simply like the Rambam says. Why? She'ein nichnas l'sham ela kohen gadol b'yom ha'kippur b'shar avodah. Because there's no admittance. That's what makes it holy. It's holy because it's forbidden to go in there except the high priest on Yom Kippur. Which means, by the way, like we saw, the Rambam would have said that the Mikdash in Nov and Givon never had the Ark of the Covenant. It was never there, right? But the Mikdash in Givon was where the Kohen performed the service on Yom Kippur. And therefore, its Holy of Holies was the Holy of Holies. Why? Because no admittance. No one's allowed in there except the Kohen Gadol, and that's what makes it sanctified. And by the way, that's what a pasuk we saw in the Navi says. It says when the Kohanim brought in the Ark of the Covenant into the Holy of Holies, and then they left, and what happened? Then the cloud descended, implying that when they started keeping the rule of no Kohanim in the Holy of Holies, that's what initiated the sanctity of the place. Mavin Yavin, and you can see that seems to be true. So that's what makes the Holy of Holies holy, only because not allowed in there. There's no other mitzvah to perform. Well, yeah, that's where he does the Torah technically. But what makes it holy is that no one's allowed there. Just like we saw these previous things. Every halacha, basically every step is what? It's holier because these people are excluded. Next. Makom shaya b'aliyah mechuvan al kodesh hakodeshim. What is this? This is the technical aspect. We'll say, well, how'd they get into the Holy of Holies when they had to do repairs? Or when they were adding new ornaments to the Holy of Holies? Remember, it was a very nice room. They always had a constant temple fund to make it even nicer. Add more gold to the Holy of Holies. Overlay the entire room with gold, like Solomon did. So how did they do that? They're collecting gold. Okay, now they're going to gild another section of the Holy of Holies. How did they put in that gold? The answer is they had an opening, trap door from the second floor of the temple right over this Holy of Holies. This is what do you call it? This is a hyperbole, Rambam is saying. Once every 7 years they would go in there, to check what needs to be done in the Holy of Holies to fix it or make it better. Things don't usually break inside there.
Shavua means years, not days.
It means, yeah, once in a year, a Shavua. You have a parish that says that? That means once a week. It means once in every 7 years. Yeah, once every 7 years. How you doing, Yosef? Well, a mezuzah is twice every 7 years. But that's the point. When the Rambam says once every 7 years, it's not like they had a date. And it's like, okay, it's Gimel Elul, and now we have to, in the Shemitah year, so now we're going to check what needs to be done in the Holy of Holies. So there's reason to check. Sometimes there's no reason, whatever. They have to check it out. So that's what they would do. And of course, they, like I said, they were constantly making it nicer. Now, that's a mitzvah to do it. Like the Rambam says earlier, if you could have a way to make the entire temple out of gold, you should. So this is something that they did on a regular basis. And by the way, this whole idea, it's a later Kabbalistic idea that going to the Holy of Holies would result in certain death. Miraculously, that people went in there, died. That's a much later midrashic idea. And also that whole thing about the golden chain around the Kohen Gadol's feet, that they pulled him out if he died in the Holy of Holies, that's not really historical. That's not something from Chazal. Okay? And that'd be pretty bad if you had a Kohen die in the actual Beis HaMikdash. Then you'd have to go into this whole protocol of, okay, take out the kalim, purify them, bring in the replacement kalim, etc. It's a really difficult thing. Next. They have to take out something tummy. A lizard got in there. Chas v'shalom, someone's dead. They have to go in there and fix things up. Mitzvah sheyu nichnasim kohanim tmimim. The mitzvah is to go after, find kohanim to do it, who are not bali mumi. That means they have no blemishes. The same kind of kohanim who could serve in the temple should be the ones who are in charge of this upkeep. Okay? Even though necessarily, well, no left-handed kohanim. Okay, no kohanim with funny eyebrows. You've seen the pictures they have that you could go to, what it says in Beit Mikdash or Psulei. There's a whole There's some people who can't find, and they should be tamimim. Even if say, well, the guy who's the best tile guy happens not to be a Kohen, so maybe we should find a Kohanim who know how to use their hands. They should have craftsmen who are also Kohanim. Doesn't mean Kohanim just because they serve at the temple doesn't mean a Kohen can't learn to be a goldsmith. Lo matza'u timimin yikansu ba'alei mumim. There's no Kohen who could do the job right, except the Kohen with a blemish. So use them. Imein sham Kohanim yikansu levim. Next, you don't have Kohanim qualified to do this work, so find Levim. So technically speaking, Ben Levi, it's better that a Levi do it, enter the Holy of Holies or even the actual the Kodesh, and do the work there. Lo matzu Levim, you can sue Yisrael. Can't find Levim, so find the regular Israelites to do this. Mitzvah b'torim, and they at least should be pure. They've had the paraduma water sprinkled on them. They've been to mikvah, at least them. So you could technically have, if there was a Jewish guy, he's the best goldsmith around, he's the one who could do this job right, so he would go into the Holy of Holies. Nothing wrong with that. That's a mitzvah. Lo matzu torim, you can sue tmeim, that so you could use tmeim even. Maccabean times, everybody has been in war, everybody's tamei right now. The next time we could get a pure person will be about 9 days from now. So send in the tmeim. Tamei uval mum. So now I gotta ask you a question. You have a contaminated Jew or one with a Baal Mum. What's the preference? You can ace tamei v'al, you can ace Baal Mum. Shatuma dechuya b'tzibur. Tuma is dechuya b'tzibur as we saw, but a Mum is never dechuya b'tzibur. There's no such thing as, well, remember, we have Kohanim. There's not a lot of Kohanim on duty. Everybody's tamei. A guy died in the dormitory. So Tuma dechuya b'tzibur, so there's still Kohanim. But a Baal Mum can never do the avodah. So the Tumah is better that the Tameh go than the Baal Mum. Okay. Whoever goes into the Eichal to fix something. By the way, the Takain in Hebrew doesn't just mean fix that which is broken. It also means to improve something. Nothing is necessarily fixing. The floor tiles of the Beis Hamikdash, there's very little anybody walking there that's going to break them. You know, you build it right and nothing's happening there. Nothing really should happen that requires fixing, right? At least ideally. Like the whole thing, we check our tefillin much more often than we should. Chazal didn't have this whole thing, check your tefillin. They said check your mezuzahs often, but not your tefillin. Nowadays, people check their tefillin a lot more often, right? You're smiling about this.
No, I know the Rambam brings down it's directly from the Gemara.
Yeah.
It says you don't have to check them. And then I remember reading the it was this one commentary. It's like, oh, actually, like these later on when you say to do it.
Yeah.
Well, why do they say to do it? It says that you don't have to.
Really, if you did something right, you built the Beis Hamikdash well enough. It's not like people are living in there.
Yeah.
It should stay well. So the takain in this case doesn't necessarily mean fixing. It means improving also. A takana is not fixing something; it's an improvement. Okay. You can subitevot imain sham tevot. Okay. You can subitevot. So they go down in boxes. Basically, it's that they only see what they have to see. Spot checks. Imain sham tevot. Oh, she'if sharlan shiyasu betevot. Really, you don't have the way to do this. You don't have the right elevator. Basically, it was an elevator. It was a mechanical elevator with, it was done by pulleys and stuff. But the whole point is, it's not practical to do this for what they need to do. You can sue derech p'tachim. So there's actual doorways. We saw also earlier that there are side doors, trap doors to all these things. I would think that, for example, if they are looking which walls of the Holy of Holies need to be coated with gold. Remember, they have a, I like to say this also because this is something that was practical. They're adding gold to the walls of the Holy of Holies. They need to get a view of the whole place in order to know which areas don't have gold yet. And they want to make it nice and symmetrical. They said, oh, we did the right wall, the east wall, and this wall. They have to know what they're looking at in order to be able to do this. They have to bring in light. So this is something that they did. It wasn't that they treated this whole thing as like, people imagine superstitiously, like the Kodesh HaKodeshim was built once and no one ever went there. The Kohen Gadol occasionally, and if anybody ever went in there, he would die. That's not the way we understand it based on these Mishnahs, based on the Rambam. It's considered a privilege. It is considered a mitzvah min hamuvchar that we are constantly making the Beis Hamikdash look nicer. That was very important. That's what the Rambam says at the beginning. So if they were trying to improve the Kodesh Kodeshim, that's a great thing.
I mean, you never go in there to make any kind of improvements except once a year. That room's going to be really dusty. Like all the the curtains and everything.
Well, there's two curtains, and they would change the curtains out. They'd swap them out, always make nicer curtains and clean them. But that was just the curtains that divided it. But even then, what do you do? Remember, it's one big room. the temple. So when they take down the curtains, so they're probably making sure that it's not open. Like as they're putting on the curtain, like the lechem aponim, as they're taking out the lechem aponim, they're already putting on new ones. So yeah, they had ways of doing this to try to keep it tzniut. But when you couldn't. When they were building in Herodian times, they took down the actual building that was there and they just rebuilt from scratch. So of course they could see this. Well,
How you sweep the floor?
how do you sweep the floor?
Yeah.
So they have to do this. It's not like the Kodesh. Like I said, we have to get this out of our minds. The Kodesh Kodashim was some magical place where they couldn't cross this line. They were deathly afraid because they would die. They treated it with a lot of respect, but they also kept it up very nicely because that is the kavod, and they were constantly trying to make it look nicer. Because that is the kavod, that's the mitzvah. Make it nicer and to improve it. Yeah.
From I think Rosh Yeshiva,
Yeah.
They compare the mikdash to a regular house. It's like how your parents' bedroom. You wouldn't go into your parents' bedroom really stop.
Well, my kids don't know that yet.
Well, you're a kid, but like when you get older, you don't really go into your parents' bedroom and stop.
Yeah.
Unless you have a reason to go there. It's the
Yeah.
same thing. It's kavod.
Yeah. Should know not to go in there, but sometimes the maid has to go in there and clean up. Yeah. So we'll stop at this parak because it's not worth to start the next parak next time. Let's pause for questions. I'm going to stop the sharing. See if you guys are still here. Okay, we still have the chaver there. Any questions what we did tonight or comments?
Yeah, Rabbi Avi, I have a question for you. According to Kohanim, do you have to shave the eyebrows and the whole entire hair with the knife?
So nowadays, by nowadays I mean ever since the time of Moses, Kohanim are required to have short haircuts. They don't shave anything. Yechezkel says, "Kasom yichsemu rashihem," means they have very short haircuts, and that's a reference to the biblical prohibition that the Kohanim should not have long hair when they serve in the temple. But they don't have to ever shave off anything, and it's probably better that they have beards. They don't have to touch any of their body hair, of course. If it's technically permissible for them to shave their heads, they just have to leave payas. But that also look weird. Like a Kohen who's entirely bald. It says that a Kohen could have male pattern baldness, but if he's missing even the stuff that everybody has, like a little bit above the ears and going around the back, so that's a moon. So Kohanim basically had very short haircuts, whatever hair they had, and they didn't shave anything. And I would hope that a Sanhedrin would basically impose like a dress code, perhaps how Kohanim should have their beards done also. We don't have any halachas there about how Kohanim had to do their beards. Technically speaking, if a Kohen has a way to trim his beard very short, he could be allowed to serve. There's no requirement that they grow their beards long. Although I would say
what about the eyebrows? What
the
about
eyebrows also. Kohanim have no commandment to touch up their eyebrows whatsoever. Their eyebrows are natural. I think maybe if you have an older guy and he's already a little bit too bushy, so the same way he gets his haircut nice, he should also get his eyebrows trimmed. But there's no halachas regarding that. You guys have questions? Okay.
What about regarding when the guys who were going to open Har-Beit on Tisha B'Av, they do the mikveh the day before. How long they sleep? They don't sleep the next day. They don't sleep the whole entire night, or they allowed to go sleep the entire night to the next day before they went to mikveh.
So
before
people.
I'm sorry, they do the mikveh like erev Tisha B'Av, and they. They like erev Tisha. I'm asking about erev Tisha. On the night before the Tisha B'Av start.
That's fine. You could go to mikveh the day before Tisha B'Av and just make sure not to become contaminated until you get to Har-Beit. That's what I do. That's what everybody does. Ideally, they should do that. The rabbis are talking about this. If you have to go pray at the temple on Tisha B'Av, so you could technically go to mikveh on Tisha B'Av. On Yom Kippur also. The Kohen Gadol goes to mikveh on Yom Kippur. But they close most of the mikvahs on Tisha B'Av, so we have to go before Tisha B'Av. So that's what we do. And now we're going to have to call it an evening.
Wait, one last question.
Yeah.
For the Tzurat HaMenorah, is that just a candelabrum with 7 candle holders? Does it need to look like a fancy menorah kind of thing?
So I guess it would be fancy, like the one that specific to the temple with the kaftor and the perach and things like that. The way the Rambam describes it. If you just say like, oh, this is a house, it looks like the temple. No, it has to be reminiscent of the temple. And when people are trying to do that, by the way. You know, it would be pretty clear. So, that's why the Rambam mentioned this thing. If you change the number of branches, it's obvious it's not supposed to be like a temple menorah, because a temple menorah is very specific. That whole 7, there's something behind that number, by the way. Esoterically speaking, why 7 branches and why the one in the middle? There's the whole thing, which is the Ner Ma'aravi, remember? So when it's when you're trying to make a temple one and when you're just trying to make a Jewish symbol. Yeah. We'll see you guys next week on Thursday. Be well.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.